Welcome to
Yeah.
another episode of Creative Leaders
Oh, you have
Unplugged.
to start again because sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Have a little pause. Yes.
Welcome to Creative Leaders Unplugged, a podcast brought to you by Future Skills Academy. I'm Morgan with Arna, and today we're talking to Steven Steers. Steven Steers is many things. He's a multi-hyphenate, a storyteller, a salesman, a musician, a traveler, but he is committed to bringing his whole self everywhere that he goes, and he focuses on being a human first.
Yes, which is useful if you're a human.
Yes.
Hey,
And especially when things are getting less human. Yeah. Yeah.
I try to be human first. Yeah, yeah, that's also really helpful. Maureen, before we start, how are
Mhm.
you doing?
Yeah. Wait.
Wait, what?
I'm not used to being a human. What do you mean by this question?
I want to be
Um,
human first. Hey, Morgan, how are you doing?
how am I doing?
What have you been up to
What have
the
I been up
last?
to? Yeah. So since the last time you saw me, I have been taking things very slow and I've been reading a lot. Yes. And I have been cooking more and taking care of my plants. It's been very quiet, intentionally quiet, but it's also been very necessary and very, yeah, good for me to, to pause and to think about, okay, yeah, how am I operating? And is this how I want to keep operating? And what do I want to change? But then the stories have been my escape from reality to
What
live
have
in
you
the.
been what have you been reading?
Yeah, so lately I've been reading a lot of fiction books. There was one that I just read about a Korean lady who opens her own bookshop. There's another book that I just read. I'm looking over at my table of books. There's one called Romantic Comedy, which is about a comedy writer who has a reluctant relationship with a pop star. She doesn't want to be in a relationship, but somehow he charms her, and it's very funny. But so a lot of fiction and a lot of popular fiction, which is not my usual. My usual is usually like classic American literature or self-help books. But I really wanted to kind of immerse myself in, okay, what are people reading? What's on the bestseller lists?
Mhm.
And sometimes it's been disappointing. There's been a few books I've read that I'm like, I cannot believe I just read that. But it's helping give me a better idea of like, okay, what's on the consciousness of the public, I guess.
Yeah, and and also it helps. I just read this article about how reading fiction helps you with empathy, developing
Oh,
more empathy.
mm,
And in a way, reading helps you step into the shoes of someone else that you are not, and you kind
yeah.
of live, the life of that person a little bit in your head, right? You see the things through their eyes, and so if it's written well, obviously.
Hmm.
So it has. So I think reading in general is good.
Yeah.
Whatever you're reading, fiction also really helps you in real life as well. So
Yeah. And it
yeah,
gives you different perspectives or people I wouldn't normally talk to in my daily life.
yeah,
Reading
yeah.
books where they're the main character. And
All right.
yeah,
Yeah.
but thanks for asking,
Well,
Anna. How are you?
yeah. Well, almost the opposite. Yeah. So yeah, it's been really hectic and busy, and I'm creating all these tutorial videos and which is nice to have, but to make them is interesting. No, I really like. I've been meeting a lot of people, talking to a lot of people, getting a lot of inspiration and energy from different people.
Hmm.
It's been a bit messy. Also, my kids, my daughter is doing her exams, so that brings a whole lot of tension
Yeah.
to the household. My son is going to middle school as well. So this is his
Okay. Big
last year.
change.
Yeah, big changes going on, which is interesting. And then this first 3 months of the year has basically been preparing for kind of big project that I'm gonna run with Under Armour, which are going to happen kind of now and in the coming months, which is also like the so there's been some quiet before the storm, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
which is interesting, and then I've been kind of and I yeah to me it's like I never really know what I want to do, so I'm always like I just kind of I kind of end up doing something. And I'm all into this.
Hmm.
And then I know that after a few weeks, I go like, I want to do something else. So with me, everything comes in waves.
Mm.
Right. So, and I had that in my life. I want to be a photographer, and then I'm really into photography. I can still do this like for a month or two.
Hmm.
I'm like,
Hmm.
and like everything's photography. And then somehow it disappears. And I go into, no, I want to be an artist. I want to paint, or
Hmm.
no, I want to be a musician. And I know I want to be, and now I learned that actually the waves are fine. Just accept that it's going to go away, and then
Hmm.
something else will come, and don't be like, oh, but I wanted to, why? Yeah. And my wife, it drives my wife crazy. Because all of a sudden he's all into this thing, and I'm a guy, so I will also buy
Buy
gear.
all this stuff.
Yeah, buy all this
Yeah.
stuff. I'll buy all this stuff, and I'm on this thing, and then all of a sudden it sits in somewhere in,
Do your
in
waves ever circle back? Like you're like, okay, I'm gonna
yeah.
get really into this specific thing, and then later will you pick it up, or will it
Yeah,
just kind
yeah.
of
I
okay?
will pick it up. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
that's
yeah. Right
that's
now
better than some. So
yeah, yeah. So yeah, exactly. So I play piano, and I can play piano like with a lot of dedication, and then all of
hmm.
a sudden I don't touch the piano for months,
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden I'm like, no,
it's back.
I want to be a really good pianist.
Hmm.
Which
Hmm.
I'll never be because I can't really dedicate for long periods of time. But I'm getting older. So over the years, I did kind of dedicate a lot of time to all these things that I can do a little bit. So this reflects a little bit to what Stephen was talking about a little bit. Like he did comedy, he did all these little things.
Hmm.
And at one point you started thinking, I'm not really good at any of these things.
Yeah,
Like I can't
nice.
really. So for people who
What is my value? Yeah.
yeah, what is my value? Like I can play a little guitar, I can play a little piano. I mean, for people for people who don't play piano, I think I sound really good on the piano. People who actually play piano really well,
Sure. Yeah.
they know I am very limited in what I can do. But what I can do really well, but it's very limited. On
But my
piano,
guess,
yeah,
but my guess is that there's more people in the world who don't play piano
exactly. It's
than
my
people who play
yes,
piano.
that's mine.
Oh, this is a
That's
good,
the trick. Yes.
that's the
Yeah, so
trick.
you can trick them. It's all tricks anyway. I also found out basically, but no, but you can no, but it is that thing, and and I talked to a friend of mine I used to do comedy with, and I thought, oh, I want to go back into comedy again.
Hmm.
I want
Hmm.
to be on stage again. Life's too short, basically. But anyway, to Stephen's sort of point of, all these things kind of it's greater than the sum of its parts, right? So it is
Hmm.
sort of, if you start
Yeah.
seeing the connection between all these things, it is you, right? All these things are you,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
anyway.
Yeah. And getting to know this side of you, it helps me relate to you in a different way, which which Stephen talks about as well,
Yes,
you know?
yes,
And
exactly. That's
yeah.
always good. Yeah, well, I'm not going to ask you why you have quiet time and you take it slow, because I know, but we'll talk about it later maybe.
Hmm.
But for now, I think people want to listen to Steve.
Yes. So I
Yeah.
hope you guys enjoy it as well. Let us know what you think. And if you have any ideas for other great people for us to talk to, please do let us know.
Yeah, let us know. Yes, exactly. Leave a comment somewhere.
Well, I'm mostly a storyteller. That's what I am. So I'm a person who loves people, who listens to people and takes what they have and turns that into a better way to explain to the world what they can offer other people and make things more inviting. I'd say that's who I am. And sometimes I tell jokes as a stand-up comedian.
Ah,
Sometimes I'm a chef in the house when I have people over, and always a son, and sometimes I'm an author too. So those are some of the things that I do. But I like to have fun and meet people. I'm a people person. That was a convoluted answer, but yeah, that's me.
yeah. Well, I heard a lot of some. Sometimes some. So you do a lot of things, and
Yes.
you do some selling, and you do some cooking, and you do some joke telling, and you do some.
Mhm.
Is that does that is it because you haven't made this choice? And I give you background of that question because what it kind
Yeah,
of
go for it.
it connected to something that's going on in my life right now is that so I have kids and they are growing up, and and they grow up in a world where, I come from a history and of at school, when you're a kid, they will ask you, what do you want to be in life? And, and in my generation was already kind of like, I don't know if that's really going to work. But my parents obviously came from a generation that, I mean, my father's now 86, going to be 87 in a few weeks.
Congratulations.
They came from a generation where they really needed to kind of, know what to become, get to the right school, and and then be that have that job. And well, I don't know anyone nowadays who does what they studied for. I mean,
Yeah, I
maybe a
don't.
few, or right. So or they studied something different again later in life. And so my kids also, I tell them, like, you're going to be one thing first and then another thing. And well, you don't have to decide now. So I'm just listening to you and thinking, do you know what you want to be when you grow up?
I know what the life I want to have. I wouldn't say I know what I want to be, because I think that's something that's constantly changing, right? So putting this in a bigger umbrella thing, right? You guys work with frameworks to help people uncover and innovate things, right? I work
Mhm.
with frameworks to help people sell things better or tell better stories. A framework can change as the person's context for that framework changes. So I could come into your workshop with one very strong mindset about, hey, this is the way it works. And then once I work through it, it's like, hold on, I didn't think about this. There's a thing to change. So I say that all to say, I'm some of this, I'm some of that, but the sum is a huge, the sum of the parts is greater than the whole, or whichever way they say that expression. But I
Yeah.
think I have so many varied interests that when you ask who am I am all of those things. I'm not just one thing, because that may change tomorrow as far as like that one thing, but all those things together will certainly be a huge part of me in everything else that I do. And so a large part of like what I put out to people and kind of how I want to approach the world is who you are is the most interesting thing about what you do. So if I'm some of this, some of that, and some of that, something there is going to resonate with who you are, which builds a rapport where we can talk, right? Because my philosophy generally is we're humans solving human problems in a business context. So the more of me I can show, some of those parts, is the more of you I can learn about and the more we can build together.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. And I think I'm the same, but I also hear from a lot of people, not just only young people, but I think young people in general.
Thank you for saying I'm young. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I wasn't talking about you. I was that, and you are clearly younger than I am, but no, but what I hear is that people are also, they can be a bit anxious because they haven't chosen and they feel they should choose. And we had people on the podcast as well. That there was an artist the other day we had
Mhm.
on our podcast who, she talked about how she felt that the world was kind of pushing her to make a choice. What she should have a specific direction, or she should be either in a commercial not or something. The world tells you to make a choice. You have to know what you want to be, and then you have to focus on that. And what you're saying is very, you can be all these different things, which I totally agree with. But then who are you? How do you know? How can you sell? So talking about sales and selling, I mean, what are you selling? Because it can also be like, you're not an expert in one thing and only that one thing you can do really well. And that's so much easier. And I think we tend to tell people that that is the kind of the best way to know what you want, be an expert in that, and be really good at
Mhm.
that one thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the funny part. I think I kind of agree with it and I don't agree with it at the same time. So speaking personally, sales is a skill that applies to anything you do, whether you actually are selling to customers or clients, or you're in an innovation meeting wanting your idea to get picked up by people, whether you're arguing with your kid about going to bed at the right time, you're selling something. So understanding the psychology of how people make decisions and what drives people to make decisions can apply to anything. So in that perspective, it's like if I focus on that one thing, it applies to anything I might want to do that has people involved with it, right? So that's one side. As far as focusing on a specific part of a career, what I've seen is, yes, I think it makes sense to become an expert at one thing, but not at the expense of all your other interests. So when I said, like, oh, what do I want to be when I grow up? I was like, well, that's an interesting question, but I know the type of life I want. And so
Yeah.
I live internationally, like you do, Morgan, right? Like you don't live in the
Mhm.
country that you were born in. And it's like, well, I want to have the freedom to live where I want, to work the schedule that I want to work, and work with people that I want to work with. What's going to allow me to do that and give me time to pursue interests that I also have, right? So when I look at all of that, sales is the device, the vehicle that I use to live a lifestyle that I want to live. And then within that, I can pursue lots of different things and not be as stressed and worried about what that looks like. But I would also say, on that note, focus is a good thing, but applied focus in the right direction that allows you to live the life you want. So if it's just, hey, work 70 hours a week, what's the use of that? That doesn't sound, I mean, maybe for a time it's okay if you're building the right thing. But I think a lot of people get stuck in the whole, I have to do this one thing forever, and that's going to be my whole life, versus how do we get you to a place with that thing that we can use that thing as a springboard to all the other things that make you the most interesting person in the room.
I still hear that you have what, so I'm just kind of thinking about, because I'm reflecting on this for myself, like, what
Yeah,
am
go
I
for it.
doing? What am I doing? And that, yeah, how does that work?
How did you get the, I have a question. Do you have a question, Arna?
No, I just don't.
Okay. How did you get the confidence? Because, when you're saying all this about yourself and, not one at the expense of the whole and things like this, it's like, oh yes, this is such a nice philosophy, sounds good, but then to actually live in that way, of course, is a whole nother matter. But have you always been this confident, like, yes, I'm a multi-hyphenate, I'm going to bring every part of me to wherever I've been? Like, have you always had this confidence?
Of course not. No, not at all.
Oh, thank God.
No, not at all. Zero. Like, and I guess here's another thing, like as a creative person, right? So I went to Juilliard as a kid for percussion. Like I played music most of my life. I'm a comedian. I make music and art stuff, like stuff that, you got to be pretty vulnerable and get in that headspace to have. And sometimes you're not confident with sharing the things you make. Like that's part of being creative. So no,
Yeah.
by no stretch of the imagination have I always been like, oh yes, just go do it. Like, no, that's not how it works. Though I think so in my case, right, specifically, I think this big change happened probably about within the past 4 to 6 years. So like when I started working remotely and I could go to places I was curious about, that's when I started to really open my mind up. So as a quick example, like I started working remotely in 2017. So like that was weird back then. I was a weirdo. Like you don't go to an office. I was
Yeah.
like, no. And then like I could travel and it's like, you're where? You're in Greece? Really? For work? And I was like, well, no, but I'm working. It's like, how does that work? Like people just didn't get it. But one thing I noticed whenever I would travel to a new place, I'd have to start over every time. So I have to find the co-working space, find the coffee shops, find the bars, find places to hang out, make friends. I have to continually do this. And once you're kind of confronted with that, you have to ask yourself certain questions you may not want to answer. So that's the I don't want to say the dark side, but the other side of like having all this freedom is like, man, like who am I and what am I doing? So once I started asking more and more of those questions, COVID happened. And then was stuck in a place. And I was kind of like, what life do I want to leave and lead? And then when you look at it, there's a framework I heard that says it's beliefs, choices, and results. If you look at your results and don't like your results, you have to look back at the choices you make. If your choices, you find gaps in those, you need to look at what you believe. And it was very clear to me that what I believed about like just going to and working your ass off and doing this stuff wasn't the right thing. And so in that kind of malaise that everybody was in during that time, I took a huge risk. And I was like, well, I'm not doing well here in New York. This won't be the environment for me. I'm going to leave and go to Mexico. So I moved to the beaches of
So you moved to Mexico during COVID.
I did. In August of 2020, I said I unsubscribed from New York and I just jumped out. And it was obviously a big risky thing to do. Didn't know what would happen. Didn't know if I'd ever see anybody again. Like nobody knew anything at that point. And I was just like, well, I have to bet on myself, because when I asked the smartest people I knew for advice, like, hey, I'm building a business. I don't have any debt. I don't have a mortgage. I'm not married. I have no kids. What would you do in this circumstance? Everyone else was like, I don't know, man. I'm just figuring it out. So nobody had advice. So I had to make my own advice and follow my own advice for what felt authentic and what I thought would give me a good path. And by making those small bets on yourself, you gain more confidence over time. And so that was a big one. It was a scary one, but I was like, here I am. And at least the beach is here, and I've survived, which would certainly help. But I'd say it started with just when I asked for help, there wasn't help. And it was like, all right, I'm going to make this choice myself and just see what happens. And so far it's worked out. But yeah, results, choices, and beliefs. And I had to change what I believed. And I had to ask myself really hard questions I didn't want to answer. Sometimes I'm grateful I went through it, but I never want to go through it again. But I think that's the thing I would say to anybody is just you have to ask yourself those really tough questions. And that's going to give you a lot of clarity on what decision you should make and probably what direction you should go in. And that's the story of my life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I do recognize that. And one thing that I actually have every now and then, by the way, when there's a big transition, and so for instance, COVID was, or
Huge.
yeah, and that coincided with me leaving my previous company as well. So it was just like, so I had this
Mhm.
moment of, oh, I just left the company that I founded, and oh, and now there's a lockdown. So good
Yeah.
timing, I think. Hmm. Yeah, that was really weird. But every time that's a feeling of that kind of, I don't know, I have quite often, I should say, is that because I am also someone, I can't build things. I can't put things like physical things together. I'm not an engineer. I have no idea how to really do things, really. I basically talk. So, which every time, yeah, but it's serious. So when I am in that moment, I go like, what am, what am I going to sell? How am I going to sell myself? Who's going to pay me for doing anything? I have that quite often. Like, why would anyone pay me to do anything because I can't do anything? Like, my wife, she's a designer. She designs beautiful things. These are, these become physical things, or environments, or graphic design and stuff. She can do things. I can't. I can talk, and which is so, if you think about it long enough, and in those moments where there's nothing in front of you, you're like, but when then how do I make money? Because and I actually do have a mortgage and kids, and which complicates things. I can't go to Mexico. I want to go to Mexico. I can't because my kids don't let me, you know bastards. But no, but seriously, right, it is sort of that moment of like, oh, and I think a lot of people have that around me. Like, you go like, what's my value?
Yeah.
What's my, even if you can create wireframes or what have you, you know what is my value, and how do I kind of then sell myself? And I know it has everything to do with being yourself and being vulnerable, and I know, sort of, sometimes I really know, sometimes you go like, oh, I get it, and sometimes I just don't know. So how do you, and it's another thing, and then this leads to a question, is you talk about sales. In
Mhm.
my world of design, sales is a dirty word,
Mhm.
which I don't agree with, by the way,
And for good
because
reason, though, in some ways.
yeah, no, but it's interesting to kind of, do talk a little bit about that, because I think that it's somewhat misguided, and it's there are reasons for it, for sure. But
Yeah.
it's like consultancy, by the way, being consultant also, which is to me also always a difficult word to use, because then the world of design, people are like, you know consultants and sales, as if they don't sell
Yes.
anything, right?
That's
Of course.
that's what makes it hilarious to me
Yeah,
too.
yeah, of course, but there is
Yeah.
something there. There's tension, and I'm interested in the tension of that, because you do kind of position yourself as being in sales and selling things, and that's sort of part of your language as well. So anyway, just a reflection on that, and also which connects to what's your value in selling yourself, because a lot of people in the world of design, a lot of freelancers out there want to sell themselves, right? They want to make money, they want to sell themselves, or if it's not money, it's other things. But so what are your
What do you do
thoughts?
there? Yeah, tons of
Yeah.
thoughts there. And thank you for the question. You had something to add there, Morgan?
No.
Okay. So I think sales has a bad rap for a lot of good reasons. People are pushy. People are trying to get people to buy stuff they don't need just for the sake of making a commission. And I've been on the receiving end many times, right? Like we've all been there.
Mhm.
I don't want this. Leave me alone. So I'd say the first thing is where I say I'm different and what I want to put out in the world is I help people tell the stories that get their customers excited to buy. That's the whole thing. So I want to make it human first. So like, I'm not a pushy seller. I am in sales, but more than anything else, my mentor says it really, really well, is that we don't sell, we open doors for people. So as if you're consultative in the way that you talk to people, the first thing that you outline is like, hey, like, so I'll give you an example. One of the things I teach is a calling framework for like discovery calls. So you book a call with someone. How do you run that call in a way that makes sense and is valuable to people and doesn't feel salesy? So I have a script that I help people to use, and I have a method called OCGC, which is opening, creating the gap, and closing. And one of the key pieces to doing this is setting an agenda for people. So I'll give you a quick example. So, hey, Arne, hey, Morgan, I have a really light framework for today's call. I want to learn a little bit about what you guys are building. I want to share some about us and what we're working on. And if there's room for a conversation for us to have about working together on anything we discussed today, we'll set up some more time for that. Is that okay? So now what did I do here? I set expectations. And if there is room, means if there's not room, I'm going to let you know that there's not room, and there's no pressure to buy anything. We can just talk to each other.
So I'll tell you, I get a lot of emails and LinkedIn messages saying something like that. I do.
Okay.
Yeah, something like that. Not exactly like what you're saying.
Well, this is on a phone call, not in a message. But
no. I know that. Oh no, it's different. It's different
Yeah.
when you talk to someone. No, it's totally. So there's a big difference. But the world is full of people being, and I'm not saying that those are. So I get really nice messages that I actually would like to respond to, but somewhere in my brain it says, don't go there, don't go there, because I'm busy and I don't need that. And even if they're really nice, and sometimes they keep kind of, there was one guy and he sent me a message. It was a software company, and it was such a nice message. I can't repeat it because it's years ago. He's still in my head because it was such a nice way of saying it. I thought, if I ever have a need for a software company, I'm going to connect to them, and it's still there, because so there is that. There's something about being genuine, and you can feel it, and there is something about being honest and open, and just really, because if you're selling something to someone, or and there's this, and the outcome is negative, there's no point, and the outcome is that you make the sales, but then that person hates you. You're all right. So
it's gross.
Right, exactly. So there's something really interesting about sales, and I tell you. So I've been an entrepreneur for a very, very long time. So I'm all, we have to get clients. We sell.
Yes.
So the way I always thought about sales was what I call indirect sales. I would kind of go and create value for people, and I will share what I do. And I have this open door. I create events and stuff and things, and people can join. And I know that if I give you something of value, somehow, somewhere, along the line, might be indirect, might not be you, but you refer someone else to me. Because it's real, and it's not sales in the sense that I do it to trick you. No, it's real. I really want to create value for you, and therefore somehow we build a relationship of trust, and then people will come to me, and we can do business, and then obviously because I am an entrepreneur, so I have to make money. So this sales thing is sort of also for me always a bit like the indirectness of it, or the trust gap that is there needs to be bridged.
Yes, definitely agree with you. That totally makes sense, especially in a services context, right? Like, most of our business comes from referrals. Most people don't wake up in the morning like, oh, I need a design consultant, or I need a sales consultant.
Exactly.
Like, most people don't think that way.
I say that all the time. Nobody's waiting for you.
No, but most people aren't waiting for you. 100%. I agree with that.
Yeah.
And that's where I'd say, like, the big thing is it's the context you create. So you still remember this guy who like approached you very, very well. And if you do have a need, maybe you'll see come out and hit him up again, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's the type of way people should be interacting. And that's kind of what I want to see back in sales. So to your direct question of like, how can a designer pitch themselves more? I 100% agree with you. Add more value to the marketplace. What's the conversation not happening around design that you have a unique view or lens on, and how it affects the outcomes people who would hire you are looking for? Start there. Everyone thinks it's always like, oh, you need design services. Hire me for design services. Let's hop on a call. It's kind of gross.
Yeah,
Like
so
the
that's maybe the thing that sort of like the people who I am attracted to are people who give me something of value. Can be something small,
yes,
can be something funny, can be something
Mhm.
little. They go like, yeah, they gave me something,
yes.
and they don't ask. That's not the first thing. They don't. It's not the first thing they do. They don't ask for something. They give me something,
Mhm.
right? So to your point, some knowledge, and obviously, I mean, go on LinkedIn, and it's like there's so many
So
consultants,
noisy.
so noisy.
Yeah.
People are going
Yeah.
like, here's my point of view, here's my article, here's my PowerPoint presentation, here's my thing. But still it is sort of, that is the sort of the way, if you do it really well, because it's noisy, right? So
So noisy.
how do you then kind of position yourself, in between all that noise? I think that for a lot of people, that's really difficult to do. If you want to be an entrepreneur, if you want to be a freelancer, or someone who's not part of a larger organization, so you don't have that communication power,
Yeah.
how do you do that?
And I've also held back sometimes because I don't want to just add to the noise unnecessarily, but I know that it's also okay, I need to start using my voice and sharing things with people.
Yeah.
But then how do I not add to the noise necessarily? And exactly then what Arna's also hitting on, like what's the
This is a
distinguishing
question
factors?
I struggle with today as well, right? Like just see how much stuff people are writing, it's AI writing it. It's like what's the value of putting my voice out to this? And
Yeah.
so I'm kind of turning a corner on it where it's like, no, I actually have a good perspective. I've done research on this. Like I wrote a book on a couple of things. Like I kind of know what I'm talking about. And I've been getting questions from people. So maybe I should answer those questions. Now, that said, I think that's a good and strategy. So content's good. You should probably be making some, you should be publishing stuff. Totally go for it. But last year around November, I had like one of those down days an entrepreneur has. You're just like, I'm burnt out.
Yeah.
I've worked as hard as I can on this and I don't have the results I want. And I just started asking really hard questions to myself again, as I do
Mhm.
when I'm down in there. And then I started going over my business and I started looking at every customer I'd won over the past like 2, 3 years, how much they paid me, where I got the customer from, like what was the acquisition channel, did I enjoy working with them, what we worked on. And I just went exhaustive through the entire portfolio of clients I built. And it was like really clear who I was targeting wasn't the people who were paying me. So that was a big gap. I was
Ah.
like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Who I really enjoyed working with also wasn't who I was targeting. It's like, huh, this is
Mhm.
interesting. And then when we started to look, it's like, where did I get these customers from? It
Mhm.
wasn't from the cold emails. It wasn't from the LinkedIn stuff. It wasn't from content. It was from podcasts and it was from speaking engagements. So when I saw those two things, again, some people don't like speaking in front of groups. I don't think you guys have that problem with facilitation, but I was like, well, so I'm going to still do cold email because research says that for every dollar you spend on cold email, you get $47 back. So might as well have that running in the background as an and
Yeah.
strategy. If
Ah.
you're doing LinkedIn, you should be doing it because if something turns over, why not have it? But the strategies that I'm mostly focused on is how do I get in front of a group of people that
Mhm.
are relevant to me, and especially if you're a service provider listening to this, you want to think about, as Arne mentioned, no one wakes up looking for you. They come to a realization that they're in so much pain that they're like, all right, I should probably talk to you. And what
Yeah.
that means is we need social proof as people who are in professional services or design or
Mhm.
other things. And someone needs to vet us and bring us to an audience. So in my
Mm.
case, especially since I'm working in sales where people already have no trust for salespeople, right? It's
Yeah.
a big uphill battle. If I can get somebody else to vet me and say, hey, here's a person you can talk to, it
Mhm.
automatically establishes a higher baseline trust than if I
Yeah.
just sent you an email or you saw a post of mine.
Yeah.
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 So that's one side. The second side here is maybe you guys agree, and a lot of people listening might agree. We probably don't need a lot of customers to do very well.
Mhm.
And so I want to change the narrative around volumetric. Like most people are like, oh,
Yeah.
send 10,000 emails a day, you're going to get a customer. It's like, yeah, maybe. Yeah, if you have that many leads to burn, go for it. But I'm more looking for that human side. So if I can get in a room with people and you meet me and you hear me talk and we can have a conversation, there's a much higher degree of trust there. And you're like, I've met this person. I'm willing to have a conversation with this person and
Mhm.
open up about some of the problems that are happening in my business with this person.
Yeah.
So I would say for anybody, if you are a service provider, optimize your funnel for being in rooms with the people who experience the problems that you help with, because
Yeah.
you're
Mm.
automatically someone who invests in that community and wanting to solve those problems. Now, when I follow you on LinkedIn, I've met you. I can look at your posts as a peer and as a friend instead of just some person who's trying to get me on a call.
Right.
And if I met you, we can book a call in context because it's like, oh, did you like that talk? Yeah, the talk was really good. It was missing this. Oh, how are you doing with this? Oh, well, I don't know. I have some ideas. Maybe we should book a really quick call. I can share a quick framework for how to think about this. And that's how you can build your funnel. And if you meet 5 people at a conference, every conference you go to, you'll have a couple of clients and they're going to build that referral engine and tell people about you. And you're going to have a fine year.
Yeah.
So I say, get out of the digital, get back in a room. That's what's been working for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, I agree.
And how do you use storytelling then in all of this? Because I'm also thinking, most of the designers slash artists that I know aren't necessarily as socially motivated, right? They kind of have to hype themselves up.
Sure.
Hype themselves up, to be networking or to be, sharing their story on a stage. But there's so much when I ask them about like, hey, how did you come up with this concept? Or, tell me about, what went on with this campaign that you worked on that you're really proud of. You can see like the thought and the intention behind storytelling, and it kind of takes the spotlight off of them and gives them a vehicle to also share some parts of themselves. But then how do you use storytelling, as a salesman, or then when you're, helping people figure out how to best, do this?
You nailed it. That's the exact reason we tell stories, is to help other people tell their own story better. So if you're sharing something about yourself, it should have a point and a purpose to help somebody else see themselves in the action. This is a quote I love. I read about this in the book. It's by a guy named Horace. It says, you need change only the name, and the story's about you. That's why we want to tell a story to people. So the first thing I would say is there's a framework I write about in the book, and I'll just give it to you guys today for anyone listening. There's 4 questions you should ask before you think about telling a story. The first is, what's at stake? So we want to think over the big overarching picture that, in a business context at least, we'll give the example of what's happening in the industry with the people that you serve that they need to be concerned about or are concerned about. What's the big thing that they're like running down? Example would be like AI. Everyone's talking about AI. Is it going to bring us this business utopia, or is it going to completely destroy markets and take jobs away? Nobody knows, but everyone's paying attention. So, right, how does AI affect this industry? After we understand what's at stake, we can then go a level down, is what does our audience, our prospects, whoever we're working with, want to learn or achieve about what's at stake? So how to leverage AI as a designer or as a design firm to achieve X outcome, right? Like be able to label some of the things that people might want to learn about at stake. Basically, like, what does success look like if we manage this thing that's at stake well? The third thing with storytelling is, how do you want people to feel? So I know it's really fluffy and kind of strange, like, oh, feelings, but I'll share why it's important. 95% of decisions are made subconsciously, which means our animal brain makes the decision to like a person, to work with a person or otherwise, and then we back into that decision with that remaining 5% of logic after we've emotionally decided about it. So if you're able to architect how somebody should be feeling about a thing and labeling the emotion you want people to feel, you'll know which story would potentially work well to get them into that emotional space. Finally, once we've done all that, we want to ask, what do you want people to do next now that they know this information? And this is where most people just completely fall off. How many times you've heard a great story that just went nowhere or had no point? If you can answer these 4 questions, now you're able to tell a story that could work. And so you might be like, well, what story is that? And I'll tell you, there's 3 types of stories I recommend that people use. You already have all of these. If you're a designer, if you work at a meat manufacturing plant, whatever your thing is, you have these, and they're very much uniquely your own, even if we live the exact same life and do the exact same thing. And that first is your mission. So if you're a designer, what made you want to become a designer? Or what's your well-known trait? Are you really stubborn, like, about your designs and the colors? Like, where did that come from? Tell me that story and how it relates to the results you help your clients to get with the design you make. The next would be your vision. This is probably more in the realm where you guys play, where we're talking about innovation, is like, what's the big thing we're pointing towards? As in, what does it look like when your mission's complete, right? Tell a story, sell a vision, help people see themselves in some big thing that they can lend their skills, time, and energy towards. So tell stories about the vision, the thing you want to build. And then finally, the most human side is your milestones. So think about this as, what have you been through that's been really relevant to how you design your concepts, or what informs those things that you put out? You can also tell that for other clients you've worked with. They came to us with this problem. Here's how we were able to help them, and here's where they are now. Those are the types of stories you have. And if you run through those sections, you'll know what story to tell. And then you can also tell in a way that's passionate, right? Like you don't want to just be like, I make designs. It's like, oh, but I love colors, and here's why I like colors. I spilled paint all over my bedspread when I was 4, and it ruined my favorite toy. But once I started rubbing it around and trying to take the paint off, it turned into this whole new animal. And then I let it dry, and then I repainted it every year. Here's the pictures. And this is why it's really important to refresh your website every 6 months. Oh, okay, interesting. Like you could tie that stuff back to each other in a fun and personal way. And to your other point, Morgan, with all the noise, I think that if you are not telling your own stories and building a brand around how you tell your stories, you're going to be in a really bad place in a year or two, because you're not giving people a chance to meet the you that you are. And so if you're ceding yourself to the market to let the market decide who you are by not sharing a story. And so I think about that in the following way of, there's an article by a guy named Kevin Kelly, I believe. It's called 1000 True Fans. I recommend everybody read it. I'll give you the TLDR now, though. You only need 1,000 people, no matter what you're doing, to have a very successful business, right? So if we think in smaller economies, like versus working with millions of people or having millions of followers, I can't even wrap my head around how much that is. But I can wrap my head around 1,000, which is talking to 3 new people a day for a year, or 1 person a day for 3 years. You could wrap yourself around how you can get to that number. And so just for math's sake, right? A designer, if you have 1,000 people paying you $8 a month, that's $100,000 a year. If they're paying you $80 a month, that's $1 million a year. If they're paying you $8,000 a month, that's $10 million, just the same amount of people. So I would say go smaller, go more macro, build real relationships, and you'll have everything that you want, as long as you think small and just really go, as to the way Arne said, is serve them and give them value first. And you'll be able to make those withdrawals from that value box at the right times by telling people the right stories as well.
Yeah, and yeah, I agree. And I would add to this, from at least my personal experience, is that if I look at how sort of I got my clients and where they came from, and who's paying me and who I work with, and almost all of them, I think all of them really came through connections I made long time ago. So as an example, as sort of the weirdness and the sort of the unpredictability of this is that I just did a big project for a bank here in the Netherlands, because there was someone who started working there. I met him in Norway when he was doing his PhD, and I helped him with his PhD as a designer in residence in Norway. But I came to Norway because I taught at a school in Austria, and I replaced the guy who went to become a professor in Norway at the school at Aho in Oslo. But I started teaching in Austria because I did a lecture in Finland, and there was a guy from the school, Mark Stigdorn, in Finland, who saw me. And so you draw these lines, you go like, I could never have predicted that. Then I started working on this big project at ING Bank in the Netherlands. So my tip was always be kind, be kind, be nice, be open. Don't go like, don't worry about, if you sell something to someone straight away. Be kind, listen to people, share real things with each other, be open and kind. And then, you might even make friends, because a lot of these people became friends, also. And so you talk about feelings, and that is fluffy. I think I agree with you. It's all about feelings. Of course it is. Because you work with the people you trust. You invite it, because the guy at the bank invited me because he trusts me. And he's like, and he didn't know anyone else. And I was like, I know Arne. So, because we know each other, so, and especially when you're in innovation or in business, it's a sensitive thing. You don't, you work with the people you trust, because it is about your livelihood. It is about your career. It's about your money. It's about whatever, it's an important thing to you. And so you work with the people you trust. This is why a lot of people in business, started working, work with family as well. Family comes because these are the people you trust, and
Yeah.
they're, whatever they're good at and bad at or what have you, but that you can trust them. I think we have a big trust gap usually. Same with businesses and customers. There's this big trust gap. Trust is, I think, the big new thing, especially with AI, where you go like, is this real? And all the fake stuff that's going on, right?
Scary.
Because
Yeah.
we don't know what is real anymore. We have no clue, which I think somewhere it might even be a good thing, because we kind of went to that we thought everything was real to now we go like, I think everything is fake. So to be quite honest, I'm like, I rather have that I go like, now we really have to do some critical thinking and think about what do I actually know,
Interesting.
instead of that, some of it was fake and you knew it, but you weren't really aware of this. And
You
I
just
think
thought
now,
everyone looked that good on Instagram. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just me. I'm the only ugly one. Yeah. But no, seriously, right now, I think young, like with my kids, they grow up in a world where, I love working with Midjourney and stuff, like making photos and pictures
Mhm.
and images and stuff. And for them, that's like, yeah, to me, it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
How is this? This is like a real person. Look at the face. Look at this. This is amazing. And they were like, yeah, that's the world they grow up in. So for them, you can
Yeah.
fake everything. So,
Yeah.
why am I saying this? I don't know anymore. But anyway, so my
Well, I
point
think
is
you started talking
trust.
about
It's
trust.
trust.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Trust.
And I was thinking about that a bit, because, well, here's my conspiracy theory on AI, like what's the thing that will distinguish us from,
Yeah.
from AI or something else, it will be like our vulnerabilities and our flaws
Yes.
until AI catches up with that and then starts incorporating their own flaws. And
Well, it has flaws. Well, actually, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go into that rabbit hole
of
of
course,
AI,
but
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 it
they're not
has, it's beautiful.
intentional, but they're not intentional
I know.
flaws right now. But so it's a very interesting thing. But anyways,
But it
apart from the
doesn't recognize it
conspiracy,
as flaws. No, so
no.
so I think the thing is that we are broken. People are stupid,
Mhm.
basically. We make we drop stuff. We go like, oops, oh, I'm sorry, or
Yeah.
we break things, which is fine. And and we have feelings, so sometimes we're like, I don't want to anymore.
Dude.
I love to have these broken robots as well, by the way. Anyway, that's that. But the point is
So,
that we
but
are
mhm,
faulty, but we recognize things as something serendipitous. We go like, oh, but wait a minute, I
yeah,
dropped this thing and oops, that's really interesting. A machine will do what it's programmed to do. And yes, it hallucinates and it makes mistakes, but it doesn't recognize it as like, that's really weird. I had a picture the other day and I just wanted to have a photo for a presentation of someone working at home. And then I had one of the pictures, there was a frog coming out of the head of the lady. I don't know why it did that. But to me, it's like that. I'm going to save that picture.
That's
That's
cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
That is cool. That's that brought on a whole new thing in my head. Like, wow, this is so cool. Uh, AI doesn't do that. It just goes like, answer. It
yeah,
goes like,
yeah.
it doesn't recognize, it doesn't have a sense of humor in that sense. It doesn't
Yeah.
recognize,
No
and
context.
it has no empathy, and it will never have a mother. So it will never have a father. It will never have real friends. It will never, it wasn't born. It doesn't have history. It didn't go through a, different stage in life or whatever.
Childhood trauma. Yeah.
Childhood trauma. It will never have that. So we
Yeah.
have that, so it will never be that. It can't. I'm saying now. So unless, I mean, I can't
We'll
imagine
check
it.
back in 5 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, oh, it can have trauma or yeah, right. Okay. No, it won't.
So,
It can't.
but then of like when it comes to vulnerability, right? Like how that was kind of an AI tangent, but then my thing is like one of the things that separates me from AI right now, right? Is that I have these flaws and that I have these weaknesses and I have, parts of my story or things that I struggle with on a daily basis that can relate and connect to other people.
Yep.
So, but sometimes I struggle with is like how vulnerable should I be? Because also with sales, right? Like if I'm buying something from somebody, there's a level of trust there. But like, so
Yep.
how do you walk the line between like building confidence and also establishing trust? And
It's an ever expanding thing that's constantly changing. right? So what worked last year doesn't necessarily work this year. And I think everyone should be kind of aware of that. But I think certain principles always hold true. And that's if you are vulnerable, remember, run it through those 4 questions. Don't just be like, I had a
Mm.
really hard day. Like, is that going to add value to somebody who's hearing
Yeah.
about that? Like, let's be very clear here. And if it is, how and what is the value that you can share? So, like, if you're sharing
Mhm.
a story, what's in it for them? Always think that. And if you are thinking that way, it's much clearer for why people should trust you, because you can look at something that's really hard in your life and then take
Mhm.
it, boil it down into a principle that somebody can apply in context of their own. So that, I think, is a differentiator where most people just share all sorts of, hey, here's what I think. They bloviate versus, hey, here's the context of how we got to this place. And my
Mhm.
method is called context selling, right? How do we add stories in context? I can give you the context A I can't give you. And it may learn, but it'll have a lot of hard time doing that because we don't even understand our emotions half the time. So I don't know how a machine's going to be able to sequence that
Yeah, exactly.
quickly,
Yeah.
but who knows? But in general, I would just say, as far as vulnerability, it is a device and a tool of the human experience, which I think is very much in play and helpful for you to use. But just run it through those 4 questions, and,
Mhm.
and you'll know if
Mm.
it's too much to share
Yeah,
or not. That's what I find.
that's a good point. Yeah, what's in it for them?
Mhm.
Yeah, what's in it for them? And, again, and trust that, it's never a waste of time to build a relationship. So, right. So again, going back to this, my
Agreed.
my experience of being kind and all that, over time, I was like, I help, if like, there's been students that asked me for help, and then, years later, they became business leaders. And I was like, oh, and I helped them. And not because I wanted to sell them something, but not that because I don't wanted to sell them something, but it's just that I was interested in what they were doing, and I was
Mhm.
curious about what they were doing. And I thought I could help them. And I did. And just trust those things, those relationships, somehow, somewhere along the line, they will create value for you. And that can be all kinds of values. They also can become colleagues that, start working with you,
Mhm.
for instance, or, et cetera. And so I think that's if you look at all the relationships you have. So one of the things that I have an exercise where I let people look at all the different relationships they have in life, right? And sort of like, with family or friends or whatever. But if you look at those relationships, it's really interesting to see what kind of person, what do you actually, who are you in those relationships? What do you give? Are you someone who is, are you vulnerable in that? Or are you sharing all these kind of, what are you sharing? What are you not sharing? What do you want from them? What's in it? What do they want from you? It's really interesting to kind of look at the, sort of, because I think you'll find that in personal relationships or business relationships, you're basically the same person. You're that,
Mhm.
you're you. And the more you can be you, the more people they can trust you because you're genuine, you're real. You're not playing a part. I mean, it's really complex. I know that because I also found that, for instance, when I do work for companies inside bigger organizations, for instance, people have to sell for instance, ideas, or they want to see a change, and they have to kind of sell that idea to management, to their manager or what have you. But and this is where I also kind of found that trust was a big thing, because in a way, people don't really, really, really trust the bigger companies they work in, because,
Mm.
now everything is fine, but,
Mhm.
tomorrow the CEO leaves, or, and they get a new manager,
Mhm.
and et cetera,
Mhm.
et cetera. So if I ask them to be vulnerable, because if I do kind of coaching for these people, I coach them, and I actually wanted them to be vulnerable as leaders, because often they have a leadership position, or I think everybody has a leadership position, but you have to be vulnerable. You have to show who you are. You have to be real. These stories that you tell have to be real stories. You can quote Steve Jobs, but actually, quoting something that you actually experienced is so much more powerful if you can then, kind of have that as an example of what you're trying to do. It's great.
Absolutely.
But I also noticed that people said, well, there's a point where they say, I'm not going to share everything because I don't want them, because they might use this against me.
Mhm.
Mm.
Literally, someone
Mhm.
told me this. And I thought,
Yes,
oh my
yes.
God, yeah. Because if you're part of a big system, you don't really trust that system. So you get into a bit
Yeah.
of a tension there where you go, how do I deal with that? I don't know.
Yeah.
How much you're feeling about that?
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. And it's certainly complex. I think it comes back to those four questions. I think that's like a nice framework for me to just kind of guide, like, what am I telling people? What am I not telling people? And what's the point? So if you are just unburdening yourself with something really vulnerable, you're putting yourself at risk because somebody can find something to use against
Hmm.
you. But if it's
Yeah.
like, hey, this is something that I went through, here's what I learned from it, and here's how we're using it in this context, it can kind of take the sting out of it being something that somebody could use against you because you've acknowledged it exists, you've created the lesson and pointed it in a direction of use for others, which I think is a different context. So that's ownership of the moment of the story
Yeah.
and then applying it to how other people can use it.
Yeah.
But again, like it's definitely an art. People are an art.
Mhm.
They're quite the difficult variable to deal with in a lot of situations, especially in large and embedded systems where people are following the universal law of self-preservation.
Yep.
Very, very difficult to navigate. But again, I think we all strive to just be one person, the same person we are at home or in business, and we could just be ourselves in whatever way that exists. And I think if you know what stories define you as a person, it's much easier for you to find the people that you relate to and who you can trust and who you should.
Yeah. Yeah. We should be the same person. But yeah, when it's sort of my conspiracy theory is we somehow tell ourselves that a job is a job, and you have and then you have your life,
Yeah.
so your work life balance, and then life is, and then you leave your job at your job and you go home, but you don't.
No,
That's
that's
not
impossible,
true. You're right. It's impossible.
especially not as an entrepreneur.
Well,
Definitely.
yeah, but
Yeah,
nobody does that. Nobody really does that, but it's something we tell ourselves. So if you're stuck in a job that you really don't like and you're unhappy, and so many people are,
Hmm.
they don't might not have the luxury of starting their own business and et cetera. But there are so many people stuck in a business that, in a job they're not happy at. And so they might need to have this idea that, it's just a job. But it's like if you're at a job for 8 hours a day, being unhappy. I mean, to me personally, I don't even understand how you can have a business, how you can be a leader, a leader of any business where like 80% of the people that you employ are unhappy. It's like that makes no sense to me. But I know we come
wow,
from
yeah,
that world, but we are sort of, there is a transition going on where there are people kind of questioning this. We don't, the whole idea of being a human resource is already kind of weird to me. So we do kind of want, it's not just a generational thing, but I think it's just sort of I think it's a thing that we have at the moment in this time frame where we say the job I have is also part of who I am. So it's part of my identity.
Hmm.
So, what do I actually do? How do I get value from the job, not just in money wise, but for me as a person? And I think a lot of people struggle with that. And yeah,
Oh, and we're
anyways,
definitely, and our like our grandparents would work, they'd get a job and they'd stay there 20, 30, 40 years,
yeah, because of
and
pension, they
they'd
needed
keep.
their pension.
Exactly. And especially now I see it with my students at the university, they really want a job that also aligns with their meaning and their value that they bring. So if there's a corporate, they're not going to work for a corporation that they fundamentally disagree with, where your other generations would be like, yeah, but it's a job. And if I don't take this job, someone else will take this job,
Well,
and
yeah, exactly. And they might do, but then only like for a year or two, and then they go
also,
and
yeah,
leave. So
yeah,
to keep them so keep that talent inside your company is almost impossible nowadays.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
it's such a interesting time for that, and yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
So
And Stephen, you mentioned that, of course, that you used to be, working remotely. So you'd be traveling, to a bunch of cafes or remote working. So I'm sure you also
oh yeah,
met, maybe more people are now working remotely after COVID. They realized that, oh, this is actually possible. And I think you said you're still in Mexico, right? So,
I am.
but you're talking, what kind of shift are you seeing in how people interact with their jobs? And also being a person who likes people.
Ooh, this
people,
is this is a fascinating thing. Like I was such a pariah for like traveling around and like being in different places. And once people see how nice it can be to live in other places and how much less cancerous the lifestyle it can be. Like, for
Yeah.
example, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I'm actually a New Yorker from New York City, and that place is not my place. It's just way too intense. It's way too full on. Nobody's present in anything they're doing. They're always looking for the next thing to go to. And again,
Okay.
I was that person years ago.
Mhm.
And then when I went back 3 years later, I was like, man, like I've changed a lot. I didn't realize. So once you could see that like you can work really hard and have a very good quality of life for way more affordable money,
Mhm.
like it just kind of sells itself. So, and people are more amenable to that type of lifestyle in general. So that's a really nice thing to see. I think the other side of it is people are really starting to realize that they're going to have to work for a very long time.
Yeah.
Right? Because the economy is the way it is. If
Yeah.
you're going to have to work for a long time, why not work in a way that feels authentic to who you are and what you want, the life that you envision yourself having? So I think largely it is a good thing. Again, remote work's not for everybody because it's not for the faint of heart. But I've been meeting some cool people, and I've actually been able to find some communities of other digital nomad type people who are just like me. They're entrepreneurs, they're building businesses, they're traveling, they're doing all of that. And what helps with that is most cities where there are digital nomads, I have people in that network that I can link up with, and they experience life the same way that I do. And
Mhm.
it helps cure a little bit of that loneliness and starting over. But I think it's a good thing. The office is an arcane concept. It can work for some business models. If you could do it, go for it. But I don't think results equal results, doesn't matter where you are. And I'm glad people are seeing that finally.
And if there's somebody out there listening who's maybe like on the fence of thinking of starting over, right? Whether like changing their job title or saying, hey, I unsubscribe from New York City, I'm going to move to Mexico. What advice or what like encouragement or tips would you give them?
I would say, number one, do it and start small. So you don't have to just say, hey, I'm out, and then move and then see what happens. Take a 2 week trip to a place you're curious about and just live there, and like you would live there. Get an Airbnb, get for a little bit more time than you might spend normally, find all the cafes, do your research, and just see what it feels like to be there. If that feels good to you, spend a little more time if you're able. If it doesn't, go back to what you're doing. But I would say just test the water, put your foot in the water. We live in a time where you don't have to overly commit to it, which is, I think, good. So
Yeah.
give it a shot. The second thing is ask for help and ask yourself those harder questions. You only will make progress when you get rid of the nagging voices in your head that are questioning you. And if you can answer them and be like, no, here's why I'm doing this. This is what I'm doing. It just makes life a lot more clear. And so I recommend that for anybody. Again, it won't be fun, but it'll be worth it. I promise it'll be worth it. Definitely a good thing. And
There's
then I
definitely
would,
fun along the way as well.
that can be, if
Just
you,
not
again, if you have the,
100% of the time.
yes. Yeah. And again, I think just the type of person I am, I want challenges. Like I think that's the human experience. I want to know, like, look, I surmounted this challenge. I wrote a book. Most people say they want to write a book. I actually wrote when I published it. Does it have errors? Yes. Could I have done better at things? Yes. But I did it. And most people don't do that. So like now I have a baseline of, oh, I have confidence, right? The I don't remember who says it, but they say to build self-esteem, you must do esteemable acts. So if you want to make a big decision or start over somewhere, build your self-esteem that you can make good choices, and then that will enable you to make bigger choices that are of more consequence. But start with small ones. If that's getting up early in the morning and journaling to know how you feel about what you feel, start there. From there, identify some places you might want to go to. Do some research. What does it cost to be there? How long could I stay there? Will my job allow me to do this? Or whatever that looks like. Or if it's just vacation, cool. Figure that out. Figure out what it is you want to do. And then leverage your network that you've built that you probably haven't cashed anything out of to tell people, hey, here's what I'm thinking about building a design business. Do you have any advice on how I could approach this or whatever? Just talk to everybody in your network. You've built a lot of trust. Someone may have a client for you today to help you get that additional confidence of, yeah, I could actually do this. Look, I have a check. And then from there, you got a lot of things to figure out, but that's where I would start. That's how I started.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
start small. And I think I shared this story a couple of times, but your story also again reminds me of this poem that's in Amsterdam underneath the bridge. There's a piece of, it's only a sentence from a poem, and it translates into returning is not the same as staying. So, which means that, and it's sort of refers to people who would from Amsterdam leave to go on these journeys, buying and selling slaves probably. But anyway, that's beside the point. It's sort of, yeah. So but no, but the point is that, so suppose you have a twin brother and you live in the same city, and one brother kind of leaves and lives in Mexico, and the other one comes back later, and you start living in the same city again. You don't live in the same city anymore,
No.
because you, like your point of going back to New York, going like, whoa, I changed. And you also recognize actually, where you came from. You can see it way better, because you went away. So traveling, whatever, whatever you do, travel, go and go live somewhere else, even if it's just for a short period of time, because it will allow you to see where you came from way clearer. And so I think that's such a powerful way of learning, by traveling, moving, in general, move, do stuff, go. And
Yeah.
you can travel in your mind too. You can travel in your mind. You can travel in the things that you do, try out new things, go and just try something, give yourself permission. I think that's a lot of, a lot of people
Yeah.
don't give themselves permission to do that. And they, it's sort of the similar point to, nobody's waiting for you, nobody's waking up and go like, hey, I need Arna, I need Morgan, I need Stephen to come. No, they don't. They wake up and then they see something where they go, oh, well, that's interesting. What's he doing? Or what's that going? Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I never thought about that. So when you move, other people will move with you,
Yeah.
because you're like a magnet, you're moving. So even if it's not physical, try different things out. But that means small, because otherwise you can only commit to one thing. But go and try. So we started obviously this talk with you saying, some of this, some of that, so a little bit of this, a little bit of that, which is actually, and it sounds like, you're not committing to anything, but you're committing to trying all these different things and combining all these different things. Because all the stuff that I've been doing and still doing in whatever is photography, painting, comedy, theater, music, to me, it's all one thing. It's the same thing. It's just
It's you.
yeah, it's me. And it's also different lenses and expressions of me. And so when I do my work, that's all part of it. That allows me to look at the
Yes.
world differently. When you're on a
Yep.
stage and, when you're doing your comedy, that's a completely different way of looking at reality than when you're doing consultancy, right? But it's actually not. Also,
It's
it's
not
also
though. Yes.
not.
You got to
It's
read the
also,
room. They
yeah,
both, yeah,
exactly. You got
that's,
like, oh, wait, there. So, but you only know that because you're doing it, because you've seen the connection between the
You've
different
tried.
things.
Yeah. You've dared to
Yeah.
try both hats on. Yeah.
and I barely wear hats. So yeah, it's totally. No, I completely agree with you there too. And I think we're all sold this idea of you'll know exactly who you are by 18, or you should. And like, you gotta follow this very particular path. And like, I did a lot of that stuff that people told me I should do. I was not fulfilled. I was not happy. I was very confused, and it didn't lead me towards any of the results that I wanted when I did all that stuff. And so I just had to ask those bigger questions. And so I'd say for anyone listening, if you're thinking about making a leap, make it manageable for yourself, but it's definitely worth it, because at worst case, you can come back to what you're doing and you already know what that's like. And so I just didn't want to, I didn't want to come to the end of my life whenever that happens, like wondering what would happen if I had bet on myself and just tried some of this stuff. And for anyone who that resonates with, it's totally worth it. And the stakes are low now, but they will be much higher later if you don't take that type of action. So I recommend it.
It's interesting that you just said, at the end of my life, I actually was listening to another podcast you were part of, and you talked about, I know I'm going to die one day. And so, and just, but that's an interesting, I think a lot of people will kind of don't want to think about that at all.
As a
But actually
society, we've really,
right. Yeah, exactly. Right. So it's in a way, although it's kind of like, yeah, for sure. You're right. But at the same time, I'm just kind of, I want to make the point. It's interesting that you actually, I now heard you say that twice.
Yeah,
You actually are very conscious of that.
of course. Of course. Yeah. I mean,
No,
like,
of course, not everybody wants to be conscious. I mean, we're all
no,
conscious of it, but we're like, nobody
I
feels
am.
like, why?
Why am I so conscious of it?
Yes.
I think to be flat. Like when I left and I was on that plane coming from New York to Mexico during one of the most difficult times all of humanity's had to experience in the past couple of years, I was like, yo, I might die.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I might die. Huh. And just having to sit in that moment with nobody else, it just made it super present that this is always a thing. It's always there. It's always with us. We're all gonna end our book that same way. I think if you are honest with yourself and realize that that's a thing that's going to happen to you, you start to live a little bit of a different way. You start to live more intentionally. Maybe
Yep.
you eat better. Maybe you exercise more. Maybe you call your parents. Like these are all things. And I didn't want to live a life where I'm not living it fully and giving myself fully to the people that matter and everything like that. So
Yep.
that's why I say it's important to realize you won't be here.
Yeah, but we don't talk about that. I mean, it's not part of the conversation usually, which is, I
It's
think it's
not.
very profound. No, but I think it's very, very profound. I think it's something that we ignore because it's too painful or too
Yeah.
difficult or too whatever. And we ignore that. But actually it's one thing we know for sure. And it's
Yeah. We
really,
all
really
experience
important.
it. Yeah.
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 And it's
Did you know
really
that that's
important.
what my thesis, did you know that that was what my thesis was about, Arna?
Yes.
Was about how we can modernize memorials. But essentially the thing that you find, of
Fascinating.
course, it's very uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable and confronting, right? To encounter, whether we're experiencing a loss ourselves or, thinking about our own end. And it's, of course, it's confronting and it's big and there's a lot of feelings and emotions. But through all the research that I did, I found that the closer people were able to come to that, not in terms of a timeline, but rather just grappling with those questions in their mind, the more life it allowed them to allowed them to live, because they're then, re-questioning, hey, I always spend my days like this, but is this how I really want to spend my days? Or, hey, I'm going to start eating healthier, or I'm going to reach out to that person that means a lot to me. And so the
Yeah.
more that we can kind of,
Exactly.
yeah.
Life is at stake every single day. And like, I put that into the way I work with people. Like I'm here, I'm completely with you. I'm here to help you do this. And like, again, that's not for everybody and that's totally fine. But that's how I live my life and I'm fulfilled as a result of that. And that's what I think most people are searching when they're like, oh, I want to be happy. It's like, well, happiness is BS in my opinion, because if you're hungry and you get that burger and that soda, now you're happy. And then what happens after that? So happiness is a fleeting thing that people are putting as a construct, whereas fulfillment is what we're really searching for, which is challenges. I did this thing, I started it and I finished this project, right? Like that's what people are really searching for. So I want to at least be a conduit to people realizing that that's a way to think about it. And because we have this big exclamation point at the end of it all, that's always we're heading ever closer towards, that should help you frame that there's different decisions you can make and probably should make to be the person you think you already are.
Yeah.
Do you have any like practices or things you do to help you? Because I'm a bit of easily distracted, a bit out of sight, out of mind. Do you have any practices or things that you do to help you remember that you want to, keep this in mind when you're operating?
I mean, I meditate every day. I did a lot of journaling. I'm on a break from that from right now. I'm big on like Pomodoros in the morning. So I just like do all the hard stuff first. That's one way I remember. So everything's easy after you've done all the hard things, like go for a really hard workout or whatever. That's one way I do it. I ask for help. That's one way I memorialize that. And then, yeah, just kind of like when I say I ask for help, I have people I can be very honest with, and they're very honest with me. So like just those types of things put a lot of stuff in perspective, and I recommend that for anybody. I'd say those. And I nap. Napping is also a good thing that I do on a regular basis, which is
Oh,
helpful.
really?
Oh yeah, every day.
Can't
Every
believe
day.
it.
Oh, I couldn't not
He
do it.
lives in Mexico. That's
Oh, that's a Mexican thing.
I don't know if it's a
Yeah.
Mexican thing. It's a Spain thing for sure, but
Yeah.
Warm
those are things that
weather.
help me. Oh, it's so
Yeah.
nice. The weather here is
Oh,
great.
I'm so jealous. Don't tell me. Okay.
You just have to believe me.
I believe you. I believe you. Yeah. Oh my God. So what about, so no, and I actually wanted to kind of link to so I started talking about end of life. And also, if you think about, in 10 years time, for instance, I'm assuming you live longer than 10 years, but just saying what's next? What's the future? What do you, what do you think is going to happen in the future? And for you, but also maybe something that you see happening as a sort of maybe connected to AI or something else, something more important, or anything. What is the future?
Bigger thing for, I think communities are going to go even more massive than they are, as far as like COVID really sectioned people off into being more digital. I think there's going to be a huge premium on getting people in rooms, that people are really going to invest a lot of time and energy and resources into being a part of, because they want that human experience and to be around people. So that's something I'm betting on a lot. And I think AI just still can't do that. As long as we're people, we're going to need to be around people. That's how we get our charge. So I think anybody in professional services or anyone listening, if you can curate really interesting human experiences, you can solidify your place in the market, and that's going to bring people towards you, because people have enjoyed your presence. They're going to bring more people who are like-minded, and that way. So that's something I'm definitely betting on. I also think that there's to your point, Arna, more like, because everything's fake, there's a big search for what is real,
Mm.
and people are looking for ways to discern what that is. And I think, again, telling your story is a great way to help people see what's real, because a machine can't do it that way. So I think that's a big opportunity for people. And then those would be the two on business. For me, my whole goal here with consulting is to save up a war chest and buy into businesses and have a holding company that owns a series of businesses that I either manage or moderately operate. And then that can give me the lifestyle I want to live and make more content and write more books and make more music and be the creative that I want, because I've used my business skills to build a life of creativity. That's where I see myself in 10 years
Cool.
or less, hopefully.
Well, we'll be checking up on you.
I love it.
Yeah. All right. That's awesome. Thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed speaking to you.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for Mark Bolick for the introduction. Shout out to Mark.
Yay, Mark. Yes. Thank you, Mark. Yeah. All right.